Good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining our second monthly Data Lab community event. I'm Brian Hills, Deputy CEO of the Data Lab, and delighted that you can join us this morning to talk about developing a data-driven culture. A warm welcome to those who are in the community and joining. It's also being broadcast externally as well, so warm welcome to everybody externally. And for those who may not know already, although I think most of you do, but Data Lab essentially is Scotland's Innovation Centre for Data and AI, with the mission to help Scotland use data to help develop economic and social value for the country. And in terms of the community itself, our goal is to help anyone in Scotland and increasingly the world, which I'll come to in a minute, to connect, engage and learn from others on their data journey to help each other become successful. And a key thing for us on that is developing a safe, open and productive community to help people come together and contribute. So at the moment, we are running a pilot phase of community. We have 200 members signed up, largely from Scotland, but we have friends in England, Africa and South America. Next week, as part of DataFest Our People, we will be launching the community formally, so anyone can join. Got 150 on the wait list at the moment, from over 10 countries around the world, as well as far away as Melbourne in Australia and all over Europe and some of the Americas as well. So it's really great that people are interested in joining the Scottish community for data, and shows the potential for that global collaboration, which we are really excited about. So I think Paul, who is helping us run this event, is going to post a link in the chat. So if you want to sign up, or you know people who would benefit from it, then please share that. And one other thing to mention on community before we get started, today we've also launched a call for members who would like to mentor others in the community network. So if you're interested in doing that, maybe you haven't done it before, that's absolutely fine. We are going to provide guidelines on how to do it and some training. If you're interested, then please reply to the post that we put up this morning. So anyway, let's get cracking with today's event on developing a data-driven culture. This is the culmination of August's monthly theme that we've been running in community. A couple of things on housekeeping. So as I say, we are really focused on creating a safe, open and productive space for sharing ideas and questions, really in line with our values of innovation, growth, support and respect at the Data Lab, and we ask you to fully embrace that. Questions are very welcome, really encouraged from everybody who's joining us today. If you could post any questions you have on the Q&A piece in Zoom, I will pick them up and ask Sam and Manira. Appreciate that. Well, I'm actually in the office today, which makes a big change, but Sam and Manira at home. So again, please accommodate the fact there may be dogs, cats, random kids or whatever happening. That's life at the moment. And finally, we're recording this and we're going to post it in the community. So it's an opportunity to watch back or recommend to others or share further thoughts on the discussion today. So that's all the background out of the way. Let's get started. I want to give a warm welcome to Manira Ahmad, Chief Officer at Public Health Scotland, and Sam Netherwood, Lead for Data Culture and Behaviour Change at Medano. Welcome both, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Brian.
Let's kick off with a couple of introductions then, and just introduce yourself to the audience today. Manira, would you like to go first, and what your role is and your interest in this area?
Oh, thank you very much, Brian, and thank you to Data Lab and the community for inviting me along today. I'm really excited to get into this conversation. So Brian, as you said, I'm the Chief Officer at Public Health Scotland, a fairly new role, as I think this is week 3 for me, so really exciting stuff. Public Health Scotland itself is a fairly new organisation, actually one of the biggest organisations to form during the pandemic. So we're just coming up to being 18 months old. My role within Public Health Scotland has actually changed quite a bit over 18 months, as you can appreciate, from being and dealing with a pandemic and response to COVID, now through to remobilising and bringing together a new organisation which consists of over 1,100 people. My passion and focus is around data and analytics, but even more than that is around how we tell the story from the information in the data, how we can get those that aren't from a data-driven background to understand the importance of change, they understand the importance of service delivery, but also how change can happen using the information. So a lot of my role over the last, if I can focus, Brian, if it's okay with you, in the last couple of months, has been in and around, firstly, looking at across our analytical population, and we have quite a large number of analysts and data managers that work across Public Health Scotland. We've been recruiting very heavily, which has been great. We've had lots of new people start the organisation, and they still are starting, but also looking at how to develop the training and induction for those individuals that do start. We've also been looking and developing new platforms open to the public around COVID response, where the hotspots are, and that's been really, really interesting because we've had the user, i.e. the citizen, at the centre of that design. So not only have we been working with policymakers, local leaders, people that are delivering services, but also with citizens by using the data. And it's been really, really exciting. I mean, we're not perfect by any means, but we have came on such a long journey. And what I'm so honoured to be part of Public Health Scotland. One of the reasons I'm so honoured to be part of Public Health Scotland, and you might think I would say that because I'm there, but it's because our ability to innovate and keep reiterating the change, because data itself is only worth the paper it's written if people can't understand it, people can't use it, and importantly, people can't access it. And it's great to see we've got a lot ahead of us coming up, and I look forward to this conversation, but also conversations that come off from this session as well. So thank you, Brian.
Great, thank you, Manira. And Sam, hello, Sam.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. Yeah, and like to reiterate, thanks to Data Lab and you guys for having me this morning. So my background is not, I suppose, what you would consider a data person, or at least the definition that most organizations would have of somebody who works in data and analytics. So I'm a product designer by background, and I'm fairly old. So this is back before product design just meant designing apps and UX, designing physical products and the experience around them. But then about 10 years ago, I sort of had an accidental career change and moved into organizational design and culture change. And 3 years ago, that sort of led me to join Medano, who are a data consultancy. So we do data strategy, intelligent data management, applied machine learning, data innovation, visualization, lots of the things you might expect a data consultancy to do. But then we also have this behavioral change design capability that 3 years ago I set up with colleagues and now lead. And our focus essentially is to help organizations to change from a human perspective. So how do we consider the role of people and their relationship with data in an organization, and how can we change patterns of behavior to drive more of the behaviors, more of the stories we need when it comes to data, and ultimately, Manira, to your point, right, to make sure that data isn't just something we have, but it's something that we can use, people can use and interact with for the benefit of the organization. That's me.
Fantastic, thanks, Sam. So let's get going with some questions. Again, for anybody on the webinar, please feel free as we go through to post on the Q&A. As we say at the Data Lab, there is no such thing as a silly question, so just throw them up and we will have a discussion around them. There's kind of 3 areas that I was going to explore in the sessions, just some general definitions and the properties of successful organizations and common challenges. Also wanted to pull in some of the discussion and questions that have been posted on community this month to get the guys' perspective on that. And then also looking at specific personas in organizations and how they might help develop that culture, and then finishing off with some discussion on resources. So let's get going. I guess let's start at principles, fundamentals, maybe with yourself, Manira. How would you define a data-driven culture, and why is it important within an organization?
Thank you, Brian. What a question to start off with. So how would I define a data-driven culture? And actually, for me, defining any sort of culture needs to take the specialism or the skill out of it, Brian. So if I look at my own organisation, if it's okay, I probably will lean a lot on where I'm working right now. And because we are so much in development, it's really nice to say it out loud and let other people hear it. Now, our vision as one of the lead national organisations is around improving and protecting the health and well-being of Scotland's people. Our vision is very simple, Brian, and it's in a one-liner, and even my 9-year-old daughter knows this. That's how simple this is. Our vision is to create a Scotland where everybody thrives, and as simple as that. So we're not talking about data, we're not talking about specific skills or specialisms in that. It's about what people, individual and communities need. And what underpins that for us, Brian, is our values, and very similar to the values that you shared right at the start, that Data Lab have, and Sam, this will be hopefully resonating with you as well, is around respect, collaboration, innovation, excellence and integrity. So for me, the reason why data-driven culture is important, we do need numbers, we do need to understand the trajectory of where we've came from and what we're doing, but even more important to that are the people that are in amongst all of this. And for me, Brian, and it probably is a more of a reflection than answering the full question, is about, we need to be looking at and across our organisations about the diversity that we have within. And I don't just mean male and female, I mean that in the widest sense of the diverse perspectives that we have and in amongst our decision-making process, around the delivery of it, but also within policy context setting. And within the public sector, we are doing a lot to improve that, but we also have a long journey ahead of us. It's great to see within Public Health Scotland around creating any sort of culture that diversity and inclusion is right at the heart and is the cornerstone of our organisation. And that itself brings about challenge, positive challenge, it brings about questions, but it also brings about this creativity to do things differently and really get the true perspective of what our nation needs. And for me, that the importance of building that on top of data and information gives us more clarity and lets us be able to not just test things out and put that down to learning, but really make informed decisions and what we really need to do. And hence our focus is on our people, how we can develop and design that in organisations that fit for our people, which will then be fit for the Scotland as its own. And just to finish off, and I'll hand back to you after this, Brian, I guess one of my learnings, if I'm able to share that over the last 18 months, and this is very much live, it's still iterating, and maybe ask me in a month's time, it will have changed, but as it stands right now, my learning is that we're all very passionate. We really want to be doing good for our citizens. I mean, that's why majority of us sign up to be within the public sector. But what we're realising is that the demand and the need and the ask is phenomenal. And there's an opportunity now to use data to be able to look across the whole system, to connect our thinking, exactly what you, Brian, are doing here with the Data Lab community, bringing diverse thinking from different organisations together to actually tackle a similar and shared ambition. And I'm hoping, as I say, as we talk more and we get some more questions as well from our audience, is that, you know, it gives us an opportunity to start connecting using that power of data. I think data is the start, definitely the start, but there's much more around that storytelling and lived experience that data allows to bring in to really turn that into insights. Sorry, Brian, I went a bit off key there. But
it's okay, no, absolutely. So I'm going to go to Sam, but I'd like to dig into the diversity piece. I think it's really interesting, be really good to share. So I'll give you a pause there and I'm going to come back and ask for a practical example, if you don't mind, on that diversity piece that we could share so people can get something tangible to think about that they might apply in their own organisation. Let me flick over to Sam first, let you think about that one. So Sam, from your point of view, defining data-driven culture, why it's important, and I guess a theme from Manira is, you know, that connection to overall company culture and values. What's your experience with working with a number of the clients that you work with?
Yeah, so I really like that perspective, Manira, right? You know, ultimately, data-driven culture doesn't really exist, right? You know, any more so than an innovation culture or a growth culture or a learning culture. There is the organization's culture. That's what we have, and I suppose it's the degree to which culture moderates or enables or perhaps constrains people's ability to utilize data effectively, and that's what we want to try and explore. And so from that sense, I mean, we do define it, but try to be careful with our definition, in that we just sort of say that data culture really is the integration of data, insight, and how people experience work, and that experience of work is holistic. It's not just for people who work in the chief data office or in an analytics function. For everybody across the organization, how would we see people treating data, interacting with data, using data in sort of their everyday work? And I sometimes like to conceptualize it, to think about it like I'm a fly on the wall in an organization, right? I know observation these days is slightly more tricky than maybe it was pre-COVID, because we can't be in everybody's spare room or bedroom or whatever it might be. But just imagine that we can observe people collaborating, solving problems, making decisions, improving things, developing strategies, whatever it might be they're doing. Where's data playing a part? Where should it be? Where shouldn't it be? What do we aspire to in terms of kind of the behaviors that we would see? And that would represent the degree to which data is part of our organization's culture or not. So essentially for us, it's really important that we don't just create a nice sounding definition of, oh, let's create a definition of data culture and then do absolutely nothing, and 5 years later create another one. But actually, let's just describe the kind of behaviors we'd see if data was really being utilized and valued, and we were realizing its potential. And then let's understand what aspects of our existing culture, the way that we work and interact together, we might need to change to create more of those behaviors and more of those stories. And I think the value is quite interesting, actually, because I think there are lots of stats that people are probably more than aware of, right? I think the adoption of data analytics solutions is still sort of under 30% in most sectors. That I think that was the return on investment of big data projects is something like 50 cents in the dollar. But there are other interesting sort of side effects, I think, from not considering that human relationship with data and the interaction, particularly what we see a lot at the moment, excuse me, is cognitive overwhelm. People now in organizations, we do have sort of unprecedented access to data. And we find that the majority of people can be pretty overwhelmed by the amount of information that's thrown at them, even to the point where I think it's causing people to be ill. The information overload, cognitive overload, it can be responsible for up to 2 days lost per year per employee in some sectors. So there's a very human cost to not considering the relationship between people and data as well as a business cost.
Thanks, Sam. I think one of the key insights from you both then, really, for people working with data, because, and I'll include myself in this, we can be very myopic on the data. We want people to use it because it's so great, you can do great things with it, make better decisions, but actually it's that overall integration point with the company values and culture. And as a key thing that we need to think about, how do we connect into? So I'd like to revert back to you, Manira, if we can just dig into the diversity piece, because I think this is a really important point. If you have an example that you could paint for us to help the audience think about a real tangible point in diversity in this area that we could learn from and maybe apply it ourselves or get inspiration, would be really useful.
Great, Brian, thank you very much. Can I just maybe start by finishing off, and Sam, that is shocking results and information about lost days and the impact of individuals. And I guess what happens is that gets lost in that storytelling for our internal purposes or organisations. So I guess, Brian, one of the things I'm learning very quickly these days is that we're so great at helping others, i.e. our partners, our stakeholders, our customers, whatever organisation we're with. So we're good at helping others, but sometimes we don't do that well inwardly, trying to tell that story for our own people, what that looks and feels like. So Sam, thank you very much for sharing that. Now, Brian, around the diversity, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this, because this is quite a live piece of work, and kind of started about 4 or 5 months ago, and we formally launched it last month. So what we were understanding, what we were realising as an organisation, and for myself, having clear steer, and this is from our senior leadership team right down to ground level, and I know 1 or 2 of my colleagues are online today who are true champions of diversity and inclusion and equality. And Brian, the clear steer is that we want to be able to represent Scotland, to be able to represent the diverse communities that we have to be a diverse workforce. We have to be. There's no here or there about that. But one of the things that we realised, to be able to bring people into a public sector organisation, You know, we need to understand what barriers and challenges there may be. So I think we have some of the picture through our own as data and analytics that we gather, but there's a lot of untold stories that we don't get to hear. So through some really rich connections, we ended up working with a local voluntary community. Now this community still does and works with young people, children and adults, but from marginalised background, marginalised and disadvantaged backgrounds, from an ethnic minority background as well. But the focus for that community is that they're very much STEM driven, in particular around data and analytics. So myself and some of my colleagues sort of went out and met with this community, met with the leaders of the community. And what we started to realise, some of the small nuances that we hadn't seen, was the fact that perception was a massive blocker on getting diverse communities to apply into the public sector. I'm not saying for all diverse communities, but certainly for this group of people. And the perception was getting a job in the public sector is difficult, so we're just not even going to go there. And I can appreciate sometimes when we do put on applications on our websites, there's lots of literature to read with it, and it isn't as easy to navigate for some people, unless if you're good with your digital tech. If you're not, you're not easy to find where to go, and as I say, there's lots of material to digest. Now, you know, from a public sector perspective, we want to make things easy, not just in the services you deliver, but actually how you interact with us as an organisation. So that was great to hear, and we heard lots more other things as well. But what inevitably we ended up doing is that we thought about how do we open our doors? How do we open our doors to this community, from the children right through to the adults, so they can actually start to see what we're doing. And as a result, we designed some tailored, bespoke data packages, fun ones, and my colleagues went out and delivered that with the community and with the young people, which was great. And we've also set up a bespoke mentoring programme for this community. Again, we're trialling this out, we're going to learn as we go on. It was launched formally last month, and we're now in a place where we're matching people up from the community and going in our workforce. I'm not saying, Brian, that our journey is over. By far it's not. But what a start to understand some of our own practices are going against us, and we're thinking we're keeping ourselves right, but they're going against us. And actually there's inherited cultural and generational perception of trying to secure jobs in certain industries, that people might think, actually my ancestors or my previous generations have worked in X industry, that's all I focus on. It's about getting in and amongst these individual conversations to break down and diffuse some of that thinking, to start to open up the horizons into different routes. And one of the things I say, Brian, when I go out to meet people, is that I always think, you know, especially with the young people and our children, they could be the next chief exec of Public Health Scotland if it still exists in 20 years' time. Maybe it will be something different, or could be the next First Minister. But how do we open the channels to make it easy for our next generation across all organisations? Brian, ask me in a couple of months. I'm sure we have lots of learning from this exercise. I'm keen to hook up with Sam and yourself as well on the behavioural aspect. But I'm so glad we started it, and I'm looking forward to what comes out of it. And as I say, we're not afraid to say we need to change things. If anything, we're ready to make that change, to make working with us, alongside us, and collaboratively easier for everybody. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Manira. Thank you for sharing that really inspiring example as well. And we hope it goes well, and really looking forward to seeing how it develops as well. If you can keep sharing, that would be fantastic. So Sam, coming to you on a particular question. So I guess you've got lots of clients, and people on the call will be from startups, SMEs, large public sector, etc. Is there a specific tipping point for an organisation to start thinking about this stuff, or not? What's your experience?
Yes, it's a good question. Right, is there a specific tipping point? So I don't think there is. Maybe I'll talk myself around in the answer, but I don't think there is a specific tipping point or a particular size of organization where priority is greater or lesser. I suppose invariably the challenges are different for, let's say, an incumbent high street bank. That the challenges of building data into their culture might be different from a startup who, you know, from day one has been digital or data native. So I think the challenge is different, especially where, you know, big organization of hundreds of thousands of people across geographies increases complexity, increases politics. But actually we found that the approach to changing patterns of behavior, and again, to sort of my point earlier, our focus is always on the behaviors that we want to see emerge, and not on the nice, lovely definition of culture or the posters we can stick up around the office that say, oh, you know, treat data as an asset or use it to make decisions. It's on those observable patterns of behavior. And actually our approach doesn't differ greatly because ultimately we don't know in an organization what's going to change a particular pattern of behaviors. It's something that a lot of clients hate when I say, I don't know what we can do about this, but we definitely have the toolkit, and we can try things, and we can test and experiment. And I think that's one of the challenges for large organizations, is that because they're large, they tend to also have ginormous digital or data transformation programs, and they spread their change efforts incredibly thinly. And almost always the human aspect of change is kind of a bolt-on at the end of the track. Let's do the technology piece, let's do the data, let's get it migrated to GCP. Then we'll think, oh, right, now shall we change people's behavior or help them to use this new technology, rather than baking that in from the beginning. And I think that experimentation and testing, let's see if we can drive new patterns of behavior. And then let's see if a particular intervention might generalize. Maybe this will scale for the whole organization. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will be multiple parallel experiments. So I think that maybe there is almost a tipping point in there, actually, Brian, particularly for large organizations. So, you know, when you come to your third digital transformation in 5 years, you might need to think, do you know what? Maybe we don't do this again in exactly the same way. And let's see if we can think, how do we build in that experimentation? How do we be clear about the kind of behaviors that we're trying to drive, and what value people behaving in that way would bring to the business or to our clients or to our employees, and build that in to the process of change. That's what we found most powerful, is being willing to experiment and to start small. Almost, I suppose, that you might say, to meet the system where it is, right? The transformation programs, I think, are notorious for that. Here's a grand vision that we almost never take any steps towards. Well, let's still have the ambition, but let's start small and see if we can encourage those behaviors, those new stories to emerge.
Great, thanks, Sam. And we've got first question on the Q&A. So let's jump from a tipping point to measuring success. And ignore everything in between just now, and maybe hook back into that. So maybe put this one to you first, Manira. It'd be good to get both your opinions, but Manira, how can organizations measure and demonstrate success of a data-driven culture? So in my experience, data people, and I include myself in this, we love measuring everything else apart from ourselves. So you ask us to measure our own performance. No, I'd rather measure another team. So what tips would you give for measuring, success around data-driven culture?
A great question, Brian, great question indeed. And some of this I'm going to relate to some of the previous roles I've held, and others I'll do that for now. And there's actually one or two things that keep coming up again and again in how in my head, how we measure success of a data-driven culture. And I guess if I can start off by just kind of reminding myself, I guess, data has been at the forefront of this pandemic since it started back in December 2019. And certain parts of our public sector and certain parts of organisations, it's been a hell of a journey, Brian, and I can say that out loud, and I hope others can resonate with that. And it's created behaviours that we didn't know existed, to be honest, and it's created ways of working that we might have thought were challenges in the past, but has now given us opportunity. So from the massive challenge of the pandemic, we're now coming out the other side in small dribs and drabs to realise actually we've created lots of opportunities. So the two things for me that start to measure success is, and I'm going to start where Sam stopped around workforce, is about how flexible and agile we are with our workforce, Brian. Now, traditionally, you'll have teams that are set up that focus on a specific topic or theme or area, and that's what they do. And it hasn't been easy in certain organisations to flex those teams about to support where there's high demand, where there's more need, or where there's actually bouts of a little bit of calmness to do other bits. So for me, the more we can start to measure our flexibility in our workforce, we are then not just for data-driven innovation culture measuring success, we're just measuring success of how our culture works. And the other bit for me is around governance. And governance is there to protect us all, Brian, it is, and nobody will disagree with that. And the regulation, the Scotland regulator, very clear as to what we need to do in and around that. But I sometimes think we become our own slaves to what we think we're reading and hearing. And in the last few interactions with our Scotland regulator, now she very clearly explains to me, and I usually use a few of her quotes in talks that I do, so it's great having these conversations with her, but for her simple language around, if we don't share information, then we are doing something wrong. If it's for the betterment of community and citizens, and if we're not sharing it for that reason, then we're doing something wrong. And for me, the more we can understand the simplicity of governance that keeps us safe, but it doesn't inhibit us to do the best we can for delivering services. And if the sooner we can understand that collectively, I think the easier our jobs will get, and the easier governance will not be seen, oh, it's governance. It'll be seen as, well, we need it, it keeps us safe, and it gives us clear sort of guidelines and principles of working. We really will start working across the whole system. And that's already happening, Brian. It has happened during the pandemic. But why did we need a pandemic to show us that? I guess that's the question now I'm asking. I didn't ask that during the pandemic. It was too fast and furious. But now I'm asking, why did we need a pandemic to make us realise if our shared ambition is about the making Scotland thrive or making communities healthier and improving well-being, then that's the basis of what we need to be able to share the information and intel that we have. So flex and governance is for me, Brian. So I'll pass back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And for you, Sam, working across a lot of clients, and I guess working with them to set these sorts of things up, it'd be in your mind to measure that and demonstrate that working with you guys is a great thing and you can tangibly measure the impact. How do you advise clients to do that?
So we have the approach that we've developed, right, actually connects to Brian, what you and Manira have shared already in terms of values. So if we're looking at kind of, these are the things that an organization values. I think yours will, innovation, growth, support, respect. If we value these things, what would it look like? What would these behaviors, observable patterns of behavior be in the way that people interact with data if these values were true? But then also, if people behaved in that way, what would a tangible business impact be? Might it be that we improve data quality because more people are treating data like they would have, say, a financial asset in the organization? Maybe it's speed to decision making. Decision making might be quicker. I know that we work a lot in financial services and particularly insurance. It's a nightmare to try and measure the long-term impact of decision making. But maybe it's speed to decision making. Maybe it's that we're looking at the adoption of certain data and analytics tools, and do we increase the rate at which people are using particular tools in sort of their everyday experiences? So that's kind of the chain that we look at. Or, if these values are true, these are the behaviors we should see. And if we start to see these behaviors, that we should be able to measure this impact. And that's what we look to do. Is so we have a number of approaches, a number of them qualitative. Actually, we want to talk to people. Stories are how an organization's culture generally manifests. It's through stories that people talk about tensions within the organization, talk about their experiences. If we can talk to people and codify those conversations, do we see them change over time in the way that people talk about their experiences with data? And we look to capture their perspectives, right? What behaviors do you see around you? And if we can see those things change, as well as maybe, oh, we've improved data quality as a result of this intervention. If we can see almost those two needles move together, maybe we have a great signal that we're actually changing culture as it relates to data.
And if I was to say to you, Sam, or ask you from your experience, and not necessarily customers, just, what are the lighthouse examples out there in the public that you say for data-driven culture? Go look at this company. Is there a couple that you'd have to mind?
Yeah, so yeah, I suppose there are some super interesting ones, and I suppose some of them are, again, they might be described as a more digital or data native organization, but I do think there are a couple of really interesting ones. So there's a company called Intelligent X who use AI to brew beer. So obviously they are fundamentally kind of a data-driven company from their inception, but I think it's very interesting what they've done there to integrate an algorithm coming up with a recipe for a beer that then they create a relationship between that algorithm and a master brewer, right? Who has not spent their entire career using data to create a product, and how they've created the processes to kind of get feedback from customers, for the algorithm to come up with a new recipe, to then integrate that new recipe into the way that the master brewer goes around or goes about creating that next iteration. I think that's really interesting how they've taken kind of a fairly old traditional practice and integrated AI into what they do. But there are some really interesting examples into some of the FS clients that we've worked with that are more traditional organizations. So AIG, Talbot are a good example. So probably lots of people know of AIG. Talbot are a small insurance syndicate, or a specialist insurance syndicate that AIG own, that work in the London market. So it's quite specialist insurance. And their CDO, Abdul, we worked with for a while, really interesting guy who's kind of completely changed the way that their data analytics team works, shifting towards that they operate far more like a product team would. So they've brought in specific practices around user-centered design. They spend time with underwriters, understanding their experience of work, understanding how they're making decisions, in what context are they making these decisions. One of the really interesting things that they found was that 60% over of key decisions by underwriters are made collaboratively, not individually, yet they weren't building any data solutions at all to be used by more than one person. They were just creating their Tableau dashboards for a single underwriter to interact with at their own on their desk. But by spending time with people, by observing them, not just going out and saying, oh, guys, we've got a new data set. How would you like it integrated into this dashboard? Or what filters do you want to see here? They spent time with them, observing what they were doing, how they interacted, and started to then iterate their solutions based on what they'd seen, and starting to think much more in terms of a product mindset rather than we built a dashboard, let's move on to the next one. And they actually saw up to 20% increase in the adoption of the tools that they were building month on month. Not every single data solution, but the ones that they started to change, they saw a pretty significant increase in the way that they were adopted as part of the underwriting processes. Now, I think that was a really interesting example, actually, of kind of, sometimes we want to change the behavior of other people. As a data function, we look to think, oh, I wish people in the business more data literate, or I wish they used data in their decision making more often. But actually, they drove those behaviors by changing themselves. They changed the way that they operated and interacted with the rest of the business as a team, to then drive that greater adoption of their solutions down the line. So I thought that was a really interesting example of an organization that was by no means digital or data native.
Great, thank you. And through sharing, guys, we've got some more questions that are coming out from the discussion. So let me loop into those. There's one in the Q&A and there's a couple on the chat as well. So let me just delve into those. So one from Darren, and I'll maybe put this to yourself, Manira. Do you think encouraging and making more open data and the principles around open data would help foster the principles of data-driven culture nationally and internationally? I know that's something that open data had a big focus many years ago, probably 5 years ago, the Scottish Government, and a lot of people are advocating for doing more. And it's been very important, I think, in health in the pandemic. So what's your opinion on open data and how we might encourage better use or more use of it?
Yeah, so that's a great question by Darren, and in a small answer I would say yes, we need more of it. But I don't think it's just, yes, we need more of it. I think that when I was looking at some of the other questions that came up as well, and this links into what you've just posed there, Brian, by Darren. It's the data literacy part of it as well. It's fine having open data, but the other part of it is helping people to understand and use data from the kind of the ground level and all the way up. And maybe if I can give a quick example of the importance of open data, but not just open data, joint data. So a number of people on the call will know that I've spent kind of 5.5, 6 years working in local systems. So though employed at a national organisation, I've spent time working within the health and social care partnerships, primary care, community sectors across the nation. And it was wonderful. I mean, with the pandemic hitting, I really missed all my train journeys because that was my downtime to either do some work or catch up on Americans Got Talent on YouTube. But on a serious side, travelling around the nation, it made me realise the diversity of not just the need of communities, but the workforce that was in place to serve those communities. And one of the things, Brian, that I kept kind of hitting up against in my own head was the different data sets that we have. You know, so we've got really great defined data sets, but they were kind of standalone. And then also we were developing platforms to access that information and data and insights, and we were developing multiple ones. So it made it just a little bit challenging when for myself and my colleagues out having conversations. And one of the local leaders might just want to see the whole picture around their needs assessment of their community. And then the job would begin to try and knit it all together, bringing the community, the primary care, the health, the social care data together. And not all that data is open either. So it made me starting to think out, how can we make this easier for ourselves, but more importantly for those that are trying to use it. And I'm so glad to say that some of our national teams, prior to coming into Public Health Scotland, started to think about what can we do to bring all the data into one platform. And then actually, if I'm a social worker, I can go in and access it, and I'll see information, insights that make sense to me. Or if I'm a GP, I can access it and it will make sense to me what I see because it recognises me coming in as a GP. And then started the whole systems modelling programme of work, and that's still ongoing, and it's made massive strides, Brian. And why am I sharing this? I think there's something about understanding we need open data. Great, I understand it. Let's make it transparent, let's make it accessible. But actually, there's no point having all of that unless we go into our communities to understand, do you use the data? How do you use it? And what do you need? And fundamentally, a lot of communities will have similar challenges or similar requests, though there will be a bit of diversity in amongst that, but there'll be a lot that will be core to all communities. And it's that we need to be really looking into. I think we've done a great job with open data, like you said, Brian. There's been a big push throughout the whole public sector to try and get the right platforms made to make it more accessible for those not just as a community member, but also if you're a researcher as such, you know, to go in and use that. I guess what we need to now move on to is how we help people understand and tell the story that comes out of it. So yet to open data, but I guess for me, it's moved on a bit further to understanding and telling the story and helping people, and that links into one of the points raised around data literacy as well on the comments. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Manira. I guess some of that also ties into, I guess a theme coming out for me is the ethnographic approach. You know, people working with data, embracing ethnography, if I can say that correctly, to really get to the heart of the end user and understand them. There's a great book out there called Small Data, and about a person who's spending time living with families just to understand how they live, and then feeding that into development of brands and stuff. Well, let's take that question then that Lee posted, and you've answered some of it, Manira, on the data literacy people. And when you're working with customers, Sam, not custards, customers. When you're working with customers, some will be data literate and work in data teams. Many of them won't, and some of the larger organizations as well. What's your view on developing data literacy wider across an organization?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and is absolutely a fundamental component, I think, of, I mean, if we even think about kind of, now I've talked a lot about behaviors and driving more of the behaviors we need. You can, it's a slight oversimplification, but you can think of, you know, in order for a behavior to happen, three things need to come together. So a person needs the opportunity to be able to behave in that way in whatever context. They need a certain level of motivation to do so, but also they need the capability. So a person's capability is a fundamental part of, and when you say it like that, it's obvious, isn't it? In order for someone to behave in a particular way, they need the ability to do it, of which skill and knowledge is a part. So absolutely, that's something that we would look at and understand, when we think about these components of behavior. Where do we need to improve people's ability to read, to interpret, to understand, to communicate with data? But I do think, and this kind of touches, I think, Manira, on your initial point around diversity, I think one of the challenges that organizations face, and actually some of the larger global organizations that we work with, when it comes to learning and helping people to learn, that what they like to do is identify a persona and then build a learning pathway for a specific persona that separates people, so that these people go off on their individual learning journey, kind of either in complete isolation or only with people like them. So you are learning with people in this same persona. And actually, I think there's a need to create far more collaborative learning experiences in organizations to improve levels of data literacy and to wrap those challenges around something that's real for the organization. So let's take a challenge and let's pull people together to use data to solve that challenge, regardless of perhaps what, their level of data literacy right now, or what persona they belong to, or what learning journey they might be on. I think using actual challenges, almost making that challenge the business faces the primary focus for learning and data secondary, is an incredible way for people to develop and increase levels of data literacy, through those shared experiences, not just by separating people out into learning pathways, which we've seen a lot of, right, and actually creating a more diverse collaborative group of people coming together to solve a particular challenge. We've observed to be far more effective in triggering specific behaviors and increasing capability.
Fantastic. That's really useful for us, actually, as we look at community, because we're thinking of different personas, how we might best serve them, and actually maybe we should be looking at it from perspective collectively helping each other in those scenarios.
Yeah, and it's not, and a point, it's an interesting point, but I think it's not that the persona itself is not useful, but I think what we've observed is then separating people out and isolating them completely from people who are different, who experience data differently from them or have different capabilities. That's the challenge. And I think the idea of community, I think that is a brilliant, in fact, it's an organization we're working with right now, that's a core principle of the work we're doing, is community building. And actually a big focus for groups of people is to build data communities within the organization, not just to develop e-learning courses or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We have 12 minutes left. Questions are coming in thick and fast now, so let's try and get through them. So Nicoletta posted one. Thank you, Nicoletta. Let's maybe share this with Manira, because I know you've had lots of challenges, right, with the pandemic, as you're saying. Can you tell us an example of one major challenge you've experienced in the context of developing that kind of data culture? And what is the solution you've tried? You obviously gave a great example on a diversity one. Anything else that springs to mind there as being a major piece to share?
So thank you very much, Brian. Another great question. So I'm going to make this quick because I know you want to go through a lot of other questions. So I guess if I can maybe give an example about a previous organisation I worked with, and this might resonate with a lot of people, actually it still does with some of my own friends and family that work in systems. So I remember being part of an organisation, and I won't say which one it was, though it was a private sector and it was to do with financial, Sam, so you might know who I'm talking about. And what was happening was the senior and strategic decision making was happening in the absence of data, Brian. Really disappointing, and coming new as a consultant into that organisation, it was just surreal. It was like I'd entered a twilight zone, to be honest. And actually, when I scratched some of that surface, and I had to bring HR colleagues into the conversation, but I didn't skip a lot of detail, but when I scratched the surface, and it took time to remove some of the layers, the behaviours that were displayed by most of the seniors, leaders, was because of their lack of understanding of data and how best to utilise it. So there's two things at play here. One, people were being put into senior positions and they weren't ready without the right skills and the support. And secondly, the organisation wasn't making itself any friends by the way they were presenting data. So it was too detailed, it was too heavy, and it was slides and papers full of charts, bars, graphs, tables, etc. So there was those two was kind of the perfect storm, Brian, in that organisation. People with inappropriate skills to be within those senior positions, some of that because there was a need in an organisation to promote, and they just did who was around and did it. And one and the other because they didn't have a data culture based on lived experience. It was more based on just numbers and numbers and more numbers. And working with HR, and this took time actually. It was still going on after I'd finished my consultancy duration with them, that they changed some of their senior leadership makeup, so new people were brought in, and the lead data consultants were made core part of the strategic and senior decision-making process. So they knew what the decisions were coming up, they knew then how to go back into their teams to start to design, and then they started to be a bit more proactive. And when I kind of picked up with them after a few months after I'd left as well, it was they'd done an entire overall, but what they ended up happening is that they became more profitable and slightly more profitable because they weren't having to go back and redo their thing. So I guess a big learning for me, which I took into my other roles on that question was, you know, we have lots of gaps in our organisations, and I was just having this conversation within Public Health Scotland with colleagues the other day. We have lots of gaps in our organisation, lots of them, but that doesn't mean we just fill them. Sometimes it's better just to step back and hold off until you get the right individual at place, and data needs to be close, data and analytics needs to be close to the decision making as possible, so they can work together in that perfect harmony. Sorry, Brian, that was a very quick canter through the whole thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. We've got probably about 5 or 6 minutes left, so let's do some quick fire ones. I'm going to go on to something that was posted on the community itself and pull that out. So Petra, who is a master's student at the University of Aberdeen, she'd really like to work for a company that was supportive and respectful and helped her grow her capability. And so I often encourage people, you know, you should ask about the culture and values of the organisation you want to work in, make sure it's aligned. So what would be a killer question you would ask a new employer? So if you were going for an interview and you wanted to find out it was the right organisation for you, what's the kind of killer question that you would ask the interviewer, so that the people hear that when they're looking for next jobs, they might try that one? Sam, do you want to go for that one first?
Yeah, that's interesting. The one killer question. So I tell you what one actually, I mean, because you mentioned before sort of ethnographic sort of approaches, Brian. I think maybe borrow something from that. Right? One of the questions, there are a couple of questions that we often ask people when we're talking about their experiences with data, so we can codify and understand the challenges they face. And there's a really interesting example from a client we worked with recently, material sciences company in the States. And we asked everybody a couple of questions. One was, can you tell us about a time data was used really well and what business value was realized? We also asked them, well, tell us about kind of the opposite of that then, you know, where a lack of data or data literacy was an issue. What was really interesting was how easily people could respond to the second question within seconds. And everybody had a story, and lots of people had more than one. The former question was more difficult for people. Now, sometimes that can be just, you know, how our memory works, is that we retrieve what's most sort of immediately or easily available, but thought that was quite interesting to kind of test the organization's relationship with data. Tell us about a time data was used really well and what the business value is. How do people answer that? How long does it take them to find a response? How coherent is the story? Can tell you a lot about, I think, how the organization utilizes data. Maybe that could be an interesting one to throw out into an interview. So yeah, get people to describe those experiences and what value was driven. Yeah,
I think that'd be a fantastic one. And if you're the interviewee watching the body language as you ask that one,
yeah,
to look at. Okay, Manira, for yourself, what would be like a killer question you'd ask somebody?
Yeah, so you've given me some time, so thank you very much. So I'm just going to step right in and give you that. So there'll be 2.2 elements of this question. So I'm going to go around the development parts. My question would be, Brian, around what the focus of personal development the organisation has, and importantly, what type of learning hub the organisation has to connect people together. So I guess if you're going for a job in a massive organisation that has diverse skills, It's good to understand how does a data expert connect with a public health expert. How does research connect with evaluation? You get to learn and you get to influence. So that one about the focus on personal development and importantly, the type of learning hub the organisation has. But I have to thank Sam for giving me just a couple of minutes to think about that.
Thanks, Manira. We had a theme developing on that. We're not going to have enough time to get it into the detail, but Simon Roberts had posted on the community, and Sally Kerr also similar questions about how you get the engagement between data specialists and subject matter specialists. So, for example, Manira, in your case, clinicians or doctors who are, their stuff in their domain, but then the data people that can help them. And Sam, I'm sure in finance as well, it's the same. We've got practitioners and the data people. That could be half an hour to an hour discussion itself. Can I challenge you? One word, one sentence, a key thing to focus on there. Sam, do you want to go?
I'd go with build collaborative experiences, ways for those people to come together and experience data as part of problem solving or your collaborative decision making.
Okay, and Manira, for you?
Yeah, Brian, so two elements there. One, multi-agency approach and multidisciplinary working. Nobody is more important than each other. We all need to do it together. So just building on Sam, both multi-agency, so get more organisations and sectors together and have that multidisciplinary. And I know, as you say, Sally, the individual that would have raised that, is very keen, and I've understood and I've seen that live in practice. So yeah, so do more for us than we're doing just for others. In that space. Thank you, Brian.
Fantastic. So let's draw to a close. A last thing, if you have them in mind, it would be great if you could share maybe your top go-to resource, whatever medium that might be in, if it's a book, a podcast, or whatever. If people want to get into this topic in more depth, where would you recommend them to go? What's the things that you use? And if I can augment that and maybe start with you, Manira, we had a question specifically from Brian on support Public Health Scotland has around data literacy and open data as well. So I don't know if you get any specifics on that one as well.
So the first bit about the two areas, and actually those on the call will not be surprised when I say this, I have two simple things I go to. So I'm one about short, sharp updates. So I like TEDx. I love them, Brian. Short, sharp videos. And I kind of listen to everything. I don't just focus on data. It's everything and anything, because it's surprising. Even learning how to draw in 3 minutes gives you so much elements around behaviour and around just yourself and realising how you move when you're drawing on a page. So I love TEDx. And the other one, my first go-to is Twitter. I love it, Brian. You don't have to I think I've probably used 2 brain cells to kind of put the messages in because I'm limited by character, but it's great the amount of Twitter community and family that I've grown that I can link into. So that's the 2 there. Around open data, a really great question. Even prior to coming into Public Health Scotland, we worked with other public sector organisations, including Scottish Government, around open data. We continue to do that with Public Health Scotland. I would suggest, if anybody is interested to see what we're doing, we've just recently, when I say recently, it was the beginning of August, launched our digital and data strategy. There's a focus in and around user-centric and how we're going to work with communities, but also intermediaries. So we understand we're not always going to be the ones that deliver the service or going to be with those citizens, but there's lots of other organisations that do that. So we're going to work closely with everybody and anybody that supports communities to understand how we can devise our digital and data strategy and outputs better. But it's online, and Brian, I'm happy to share the link and maybe we can post it on the hub as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Very quickly from you, Sam, go-to resource that you'd recommend.
Yeah, so a couple of building Manira on the Twitter point, mention map with a double P. It just allows you to map or follow a hashtag or so you could hashtag data culture and you can see who's involved in the conversation on Twitter and navigate those connections. And then I think from a understanding sort of behavior and design perspective, the toolbox, it's a terrible name, I know, but it's essentially, it's a collection of toolboxes for human-centered design. It's even got, it covers information design, circular design, understanding kind of people and how they behave in a context. That's a brilliant resource if you're thinking about kind of taking a step towards understanding people's interactions with data.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Okay, we are bang on 11 o'clock, so let's bring it to a close right on time. Thank you so much, Sam and Manira, for joining us. I know you're extremely busy people, so really value spending the time with us, sharing your experience. I've learned a ton through this conversation as well. I'd like to share it further with the community as well when we post it. So thank you very much. Encourage everybody, you know, if you want to keep the conversation going, maybe you've got some thoughts or follow-up questions, just post them on the forums and community. Reach out to us directly as well. And anything you'd like to see in these sessions as well as we develop them, please drop us a note. But bang on 11 o'clock, let's finish there. Thanks for joining us and have a great rest of day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.